going to air it out down the field. Catch and a touchdown.
It's College Football Pick'em, presented by Harbor Jiu Jitsu on AM 1490 Sports Betting Radio. Here's your host, Nick Kosko.
Welcome inside College Football Pick'em right here on AM 1490 Sports Betting Radio, presented by Harbor Jiu Jitsu. I'm your host, Nick Kosko, and boy, do we have a loaded show for you folks. A lot just happened over the last couple of days, leading into yet another college football weekend, and not only do we have college football pretty much in the full swing aside from the Pac-12, but games have been canceled and players have tested positive for coronavirus. No, we're not just talking any players. We're talking the big player, the biggest player, Trevor Lawrence, Clemson quarterback, out this weekend, out for Boston College today. It is unbelievable. The shocking news that happened on Thursday night, and we first got indication of this when the line moved. God forbid, go figure. The line moved 4 points, and we'll dive into that as well as to why Clemson has Trevor Lawrence basically worth 4 points, but he is out. Wisconsin and Nebraska, that game in the Big Ten canceled, will not be scheduled. So that's the bad news. We'll get that out of the way. And then the good news is there are still plenty of college football games here today, this afternoon, and this evening as well. Just a reminder, you can always follow me on Twitter at NickKosko59, NickKosko59. Be sure to follow our station at 1490 SportsBet as well. But, you know, we have to start with the biggest news of the week that kind of rocked the college football world, and that's Trevor Lawrence testing positive for the coronavirus. Really, there's really nowhere else to start other than there, and now the question remains, how does Clemson fare without him? All right, they're going to go right to the true freshman quarterback. He's expected to start. Now, we're going to have to say this slow, and for people who they're going to have to get used to this guy's name. I mean, he's really good. He is very good. 5-star prospect, DJ Uiagalelei. Uiagalelei. Try to say that fast. All right, it's going to be fast. So, I mean, for sure we can call him DJU because his first name is DJ. DJ Uiagalelei. True freshman quarterback for Clemson. Stepping in, he's had moderate appearances, or limited appearances this year so far for the Clemson Tigers. Basically in garbage time, and again, Lawrence has been destroying everybody this year, aside from Syracuse, where he struggled a little bit. Still put up some really good stats, but in essence, this is where we're at now. You have to deal with this. Even Clemson, the number one team in the country, a team that looks pretty much virtually unbeatable, they have to deal with Trevor Lawrence testing positive for COVID-19. And again, Clemson's one of those programs that's been very careful ever since their initial outbreak in the summer, where they had over 30 players positive. People were thinking, how's college football going to work? Clemson was fine. Eventually, you're gonna deal with positive tests, and it really stinks that it just happened to happen to the best player in college football right now. And that's Trevor Lawrence, the presumptive number one overall pick next year. And we won't even get into him saying, "Well, I'm not committed to maybe I will come back to Clemson." He didn't actually say that. He just basically didn't deny that he would come back to Clemson. He's going to the draft, folks. But basically, this means he's out for Saturday today against Boston College. Now, what happens moving forward? So, based on the reporting, it really hasn't been totally confirmed, but it appears that Lawrence's positive test, the ACC tests 3 times a week, don't forget. The ACC tests on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. This news broke on a Thursday night. Now, Lawrence could have tested positive on Wednesday, right? Per the ACC, you have to isolate for 10 days and have no symptoms, and of course have a negative test in order to come back. The problem is, Clemson could probably roll over Boston College any given day, even with DJ Uiagalelei. They could do that easily today at noon. That line, by the way, did the line for the game open at 32? Clemson minus 32. With Lawrence out, it's now 28. It's as low as 27 now, according to DraftKings has it at 27. The Westgate Superbook has it at 29.5. The consensus is around 28. So Lawrence is worth about 4 or 5 points. That's huge. What a ginormous. Now I'm definitely. I wasn't gonna touch it. I wasn't gonna touch this game at first. Now I'm definitely not gonna touch it. Oh my goodness, the uncertainty. But getting back to the testing protocols, he could miss the game against Notre Dame next week. It's possible, and that's where Clemson definitely needs him. No offense to DJ Uiagalelei, and we're going to keep saying his name so we can practice it, folks, because you're going to have to get to know it, because once Lawrence is gone, this guy's going to be the quarterback, DJU. But if Lawrence is out for the Notre Dame game, this just opens the floodgates now for the college football playoff. Remember how earlier in the year, and if you folks have been listening to me, you know this, that I think Clemson is a mortal lock for the college football playoff, along with Alabama and Ohio State at this point. And I said the only way, and this is pretty much, I think, everybody's consensus as well, the only way Notre Dame is going to make the playoff, they have to beat Clemson at least once. They have to split, but if they split, they have to beat them in the championship game. It's as simple as that. They have to be in the ACC championship game. Because let's just say, hypothetically, Notre Dame, let's even throw Lawrence into the equation here. If Lawrence plays and Notre Dame wins, that's a huge win for Notre Dame. Great. They're still undefeated. They're probably the new number one team because they knocked off the number one team and they're still undefeated. But then you also have to weigh Alabama's strength of schedule, and obviously Ohio State's still in the mix there. But Notre Dame might jump to the number one spot if they are undefeated and they beat an undefeated Clemson next week. Now what happens if they meet again in the ACC championship game? But Clemson wins that time. Clemson's going to get in. They're probably only going to have the one loss to Notre Dame, a top 4 team. So Clemson will get in as a conference champion with only one loss. Notre Dame's a non-conference champion now. They have one loss. Then you have to weigh what happens with Alabama, Ohio State, maybe a team like Michigan or Penn State. Because they could be in the same situation where one loss and they are a conference champion. We'll go with Michigan right now because they have a better chance of being undefeated, or their only loss being to Ohio State, but they wouldn't make a conference championship game. You have to weigh the Pac-12 into it. You have to weigh the Big 12 into it as well. Does Notre Dame get the benefit of the doubt? Now I think they definitely don't. You can make an argument for Notre Dame, right? Without Trevor Lawrence. If they beat again, if Notre Dame beats Clemson next week and it's with Trevor Lawrence, but then they lose to them in the championship game, you can make an argument for Notre Dame to get in with the one loss being to Clemson because they split. Now, with Lawrence out, this is where we're going here. With Lawrence out, and if he misses next week's game, guess what that benefit of the doubt is going to go to? It's going to Clemson. So if they lose, they're not going to be hurt that much because the college football playoff likely does take these coronavirus cases into account. It's not necessarily the fault of the school, the team, or even the players in some cases if they test positive. Sometimes you get the false positives. Sometimes you might get sick. Who knows where he caught it? And apparently the contact tracing was done pretty fast, and there were no other positive cases that we know of so far for Clemson. He doesn't. I believe it said he doesn't. He does not have football teammates that are roommates. He might live in an apartment by himself. I forget the exact wording of that, but the contact tracing shows that it did not link to any other football players. So there were no other positive tests. So again, the playoff committee can weigh this into account. Lawrence maybe just got unlucky. Maybe he caught it walking around. And we've seen Lawrence. He wears his mask, but he was also very adamant about having college football back this year, as he should have been. So he might have just gotten unlucky and caught it. He had very mild symptoms. He's isolating. He's feeling good. But if he's not ready for the Notre Dame game, all of that benefit of the doubt is going to Clemson next week when they play Notre Dame. You're gonna have 1 versus 4. But I still fully expect Clemson to win today and actually dominate Boston College because this kid DJ Uiagalelei He very well could be the real deal. He's a 5-star. Don't forget, he's a 5-star quarterback, according to the 24/7 Sports composite rankings. And when I broke the story on 24/7 Sports the other night about Lawrence, I mean, we were Trevor. The website might as well have been turned into Trevor Lawrence. But all these different directions and the angles now. Again, the biggest question is now moving forward: is he going to be ready for the Notre Dame game? And how is that going to affect the lines as well moving forward? So we already know how it affects today's line. Went from 32 to 28. So we know Trevor Lawrence is right around worth 4 points for a game if he's not playing. Now, if they were playing a better team, and I'd say if this happened against Notre Dame, let's just say Clemson was a 12-point favorite, which I could easily see just by the way they've been rolling teams this year. Then that moves down to a 8-point favorite. Maybe they're an 8-point favorite. 7-point favorite, or God forbid, again, I would have no idea on the line for next week. I wouldn't know where to start with that if Lawrence was playing. The fact that he might not play, who knows? Do they make Notre Dame the favorite just because the best quarterback is out? Don't forget it's at Notre Dame. That's a 7:30 kickoff. It is at Notre Dame. Prime time, NBC, I think. Yep, NBC, yep. NBC owns Notre Dame. That's a Mike Tirico special with Tony Dungy. If there's no Lawrence, I'll tell you what. I would not be shocked if that's a pick-em at that point. Or Notre Dame's a slight favorite. You very well could have seen Clemson as a road favorite, and without Lawrence, Notre Dame might be the favorite in that game. I know Notre Dame did not look good the other week against Louisville, but they dominated Pitt last week. They looked decent against Florida State. They've dominated South Florida, but they looked okay against Duke. So they've been very up and down, but they've been the benefactors of a so-so schedule. And frankly so is Clemson. They're just that good and that dominant. They beat Wake Forest, Citadel, Virginia. They beat up on Miami when they were ranked in the top 10. I'll give them that. They destroyed Georgia Tech, but then they struggled a little bit with Syracuse despite beating them by 26. So the schedule's relatively the same, maybe a little bit more in favor of Clemson just due to the Miami game. But, I mean, without Lawrence next week, I think Notre Dame might be a slight favorite. And I would still take Clemson to win that game because I think Clemson's that good. So that was the big news from this week that dropped out of nowhere. And, again, we first saw the indication because all of a sudden the Vegas lines, they must have gotten the intel before anybody else did. They just started dropping. I guess they moved the line. Some people got some inside information, started betting on Notre Dame. I'll tell you what. First indication. The boys in Vegas always know. As my good buddy Scott Wetzel would always say, it's the boys in Vegas. You can never beat the boys in Vegas. The other big game or the other big news from the week was the cancellation of Nebraska and Wisconsin because Wisconsin had a couple positive tests, including their starting quarterback Graham Mertz, who we were talking about last week. After his great performance against Illinois, Wisconsin opened up the season with a bang. He threw 5 touchdown passes, only threw 1 incompletion. He tested positive. Wisconsin was essentially going to be down to their 4th-string quarterback, was the backup, I think, tested positive as well. And then they had, because of the Big Ten's protocols with spot positivity, they were over the limit. And so I believe they had 12 total positives at one point during the week. I think 3 more were revealed the other day. But it was like 6 players and 6 staff members. One include the head coach, Paul Chryst. But because that happened, they said, all right, your spot positivity rate is over what our Big Ten, what the Big Ten protocols say in terms of the threshold. So this game's getting canceled. And because the Big Ten put themselves in the situation where they had such a late start, don't forget, the Big Ten was the first conference in the country to go conference only. Everyone followed suit. Then the Big Ten canceled their season. Pac-12 followed. The other 3 Power 5 conferences pressed on. They started mostly without hitches. The Big Ten waited until October 24th to resume. Sure enough, they said, all right, yeah. I mean, they put themselves in that position to play 8 regular season games in 8 weeks, plus the conference championship game the 9th week, where you have the conference championship and then the other rest of the conference plays the crossover game. second place in the Big Ten East versus second place in the Big Ten West, and so on and so forth. They put themselves here, so yeah, you could still criticize the Big Ten. They might have the quote-unquote safest protocols and policies, but here's what's also bizarre. If you're a player and you test positive, you have to sit out 21 days because they want those last 7 days when you go back into conditioning to get back into quote-unquote football shape after taking 2 weeks off. They want to monitor the cardiac testing because there's still so much unknown about the myocarditis, the heart condition that can be developed through the coronavirus. There's so much uncertainty around. So the Big Ten, it was smart to do that in order to have these policies in place to play football, but coaches don't have to go through that. And maybe it's because they're not playing and they're not it's not strenuous on their hearts, I guess. But I mean, who knows? But they're only isolated for 10 days. So again, there are some inconsistencies in the Big Ten's policy. So you can still criticize the Big Ten for the inconsistencies and also for putting themselves in this position. They did not give themselves any buffer room. They for some reason they did not decide to come. They delayed their decision to come back, and once they faced all the pressure, they decided end of October was good, and now they're in this position. So Nebraska and Wisconsin cannot make up that game, and they're going to play 7 games. We hope. Nebraska, meanwhile, was trying to reschedule a game. They were trying to get a non-conference game, and the Big Ten said no. They basically got through all the hurdles. Nebraska was trying to play another game, and the Big Ten continues their contentious relationship with Nebraska and said no. I think it was UTC, University of Tennessee, Chattanooga. Nebraska wanted them. UTC was on board with it. They were going to get paid. It was like $250K for the game. You know what? Take it. Boom. Play a game. It gives Nebraska another week. It wasn't their fault. Nebraska didn't have any positive tests. Why shouldn't they be allowed? If everybody could follow the same protocols and they had an open week from another school, why wouldn't the Big Ten allow it? Now, because they didn't allow it this time, who's to say they wouldn't allow it later in the year? I don't know. But don't forget, you need to play at least 6 games to be eligible for the Big Ten championship game. So what if we get to a point where some of these games of the Big Ten are canceled? And, maybe a team like Ohio State only has 5 games for some reason, and they need a 6th. Let's just say that some of their opponents can't play due to the coronavirus and too many positive tests. You mean to tell me the Big Ten's going to say, hey, Ohio State, you're our best shot for the college football playoff, but sorry, you're 5-0. I know this last week you would have gone 6-0 because you missed 2 games right now. You're going to miss the 3rd. You can't be eligible. They're either going to say, all right, they are eligible, or they'll let them reschedule a game. And once they do that, Nebraska's going to throw a hissy fit. It's going to be a whole mess of trouble. So the Big Ten, in my estimation, would just stand pat and stand by their strict policies and protocols, not leaving no room for adjustment. And that's how stubborn the Big Ten is. So that was the negatives we had to get out of the way to start the show here today. Trevor Lawrence was positive, not playing today against Boston College, might not play against Notre Dame because he has to isolate for 10 days, and now it's a matter of when that positive test happened, when he first, and again, it goes by when you first started feeling those symptoms. Now, again, I mentioned before that he tested positive on Monday, the ACC tests on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. Now, if you test positive if that positive test was from Wednesday, then his isolation would be 10 days. He'd be good to go. He'd be good to go for Notre Dame. And for all we know, that positive test could have stemmed back from Monday. And he could have been feeling symptoms on Tuesday. He could have had that test taken on Monday. It came back confirmed positive, and who knows, maybe they isolated him before and kept it under wraps, tested him again on Wednesday to make sure it was not a false positive. He tested positive again. So he could very well, because it came out on Thursday, Clemson might be in luck for Lawrence to be back for Notre Dame. It's as simple as that. Because they don't test on Thursdays, and those tests need some turnaround time. So signs are pointing to that he probably will be ready, but it's still unconfirmed. And again, that's going to be a big matchup next week, and that's something that it's going to have to be monitored the entire week to see if he's going to be ready to go. And that's what stinks about that. For Notre Dame, too. They don't know who to prepare for. Either Trevor Lawrence or DJ Uiagalelei. So again, we'll get the bad news out of the way. we'll come back. We'll take a break. We'll come back, and we'll get into the good news, and that's actually the football games this weekend, folks. Because I got 5 picks for you later in the show. We're 12-16-2 on the year. I still have our good buddy Rich Quinones, breaking my chops. Ryan Rothstein, our other good buddy. Those two guys host of Back Your Play and The Fix, respectively, on this very station. Ryan did bring up my under 500 record. And mind you, I'm 4 games under right now, 12-16-2. He didn't bring it up, but he had me on Tuesday night at about 11 o'clock, and he didn't bust my chops. But Rich still likes to throw a couple jabs in there. I think he's feeling good about himself though, because he was 4-1 this past weekend on his NFL picks, so he's feeling a little good. But he gave me a little credit, to get back to some sort of respectability. We were 2-8 for a stretch for 2 weeks. Then we had a 4-1 week 2 weeks ago. We were 2-3 this past weekend. That's all right. But I figured this next set of games is going to get us back closer to 500, if not over 500, with a 5-0 or 4-1 weekend. Excuse me, a 5-0 weekend would have to give us the over 500 because I can't do math right, folks. This morning, folks. All right, we're gonna step aside and take a quick break. On the other side, we're gonna start breaking down some of the games here today and later today as well. I'll give you my 5 picks later in the show. Keep it locked here. It's College Football Pick'em right here on AM 1490 Sports Betting Radio.
Betting college football? You've come to the right place. It's College Football Pick'em, presented by Harbor Jiu Jitsu on AM 1490 Sports Betting Radio.
Welcome back to College Football Pick'em right here on AM 1490 Sports Betting Radio. We are presented by Harbor Jiu Jitsu. I'm your host, Nick Kosko, here with you every Saturday morning from 8 to 9 a.m. We'll take you right up to 9 a.m. this morning. Get you ready for the day in college football. All right, so we got the negativity out of the way, folks, and oh my goodness. And I only say negativity just because it's what you don't want to hear. We just want our sports. We want things to go off without a hitch. We figure these teams are doing whatever they can to play it safely. Test regularly, make sure everybody's healthy, and when somebody tests positive, they're doing the right thing. So, but it stinks that Trevor Lawrence had a test positive, where we hope he's okay. He's feeling mild symptoms. Hopefully he just gets through it without a hitch, and then he's back and he's showcasing his otherworldly generational talent. And obviously it stinks for Wisconsin-Nebraska to have this game canceled. Again, that I'll put that more on the shoulders of the Big Ten as to why they're not playing, or why Nebraska can't play a makeup game later in the year against Wisconsin, or schedule another team around the country that can come to them and follow the Big Ten protocols, and because they have an open week as well. But I digress. All right, let's dive into some actual football here this afternoon, and just real quick, because Rich asked me this on Wednesday on Back Your Play. He allowed me to be a little wax poetic about my Rutgers Scarlet Knights a little bit. And for those folks who've been listening to me for a couple of years, I'm a Rutgers alum. I'm a huge Rutgers guy. I don't shy away from criticizing them, especially the end of the last era here, the Chris Ash era. But now that Greg Schiano's back, figured he would restore the program back to respectability. And boy, it took 1 week, folks, for everybody to say, all right, let's stop making fun of Rutgers for at least 1 week. Beat up on Michigan State, 38-27, forced 7 turnovers. Now, it wasn't perfect. Offense had 3 turnovers themselves. Wasn't perfect, but I'll tell you what, they went on the road and they beat Michigan State for the first time since 2004, and they broke a 21-game Big Ten losing streak. I'll take that day in and day out, and they have a 3:30 game today, folks. 3:30. Now, again, it was scheduled before they beat Michigan State, but the fact they're playing at 3:30 and they're 1-0, Indiana's coming in to Piscataway as a 1-0 17th ranked team in the country after their upset of Penn State. I mean, this is one of the better Big Ten games this weekend. Wisconsin and Nebraska gone. Okay, boom. But you have Michigan State, Michigan. That's at noon. That's a solid game, at least on paper, between the two schools. But I think Michigan's going to roll over them. And Purdue, Illinois, Northwestern Iowa, and obviously Wisconsin, Nebraska canceled. Ohio State, Penn State's tonight, folks. I mean, I can make the argument that Rutgers, Indiana is the second best game today in the Big Ten. Oh, I mean, mostly because Indiana's ranked, but Rutgers is also fascinating, and also I'm a Rutgers fan, and an alum. So I mean, I can. I have the extra. I have a little bit of bias towards that, but realistically, Ohio State, Penn State's the best game. Rutgers, Indiana might be the second best game today in the Big Ten. If you told me that months ago, I would have laughed. I really would have. But I digress. I want to be a little wax poetic about Greg Schiano's job and the great job he's done with bringing in all the transfers from around other Big Ten schools. It's a veteran team in terms of the transfer market, but they still develop young guys. And don't forget, everyone across college football has a free year this year, all right? Everyone can come back. They have another year of eligibility. They have that extra year now. So, this Rutgers team could be something down the line. I'm not talking Big Ten championships in 5 years, or Rose Bowls. But I'm talking, respectable, consistent bowl games, some upsets here and there. And who knows how it builds? You just never know. But it's nice to finally be optimistic. We can't get too far down the line. It's one game. We'll see how they do today, but I did want to point that out. And plus, we're actually going to talk about Rutgers, Indiana in my pick segment because I do like the line for some reason this week. And I made it a point in the past to always do picks, but always have to pick the Rutgers game. And it was pretty easy at that point because they actually they usually wouldn't cover against decent spreads, but the ridiculous spreads they would cover. But you knew they were going to lose, so it's just a matter of, all right, can they keep it within X amount of points? That's pretty much it. All right, so as far as the rest of the slate, and we'll look at the top 25 here. Georgia, number 5, Georgia, they hit the road to take on Kentucky. Georgia's a 17-point favorite on the road. Kentucky, very hit or miss. We had them against Tennessee the other week. I believe it was 2 weeks ago now, so they have a very opportunistic defense, but now they're going up against arguably the best defense in the country, at least one of them at this point. And plus, Kentucky lost to Mizzou last week, 20-10. So Kentucky's not what we saw against Tennessee the other week. I fully expect Georgia to roll over them. How about here's one thing, and we have this game up on our 5 picks as well coming up later in the show. Memphis and Cincinnati. I want to talk about Cincinnati real quick. Cincinnati is your best Group of 5 team right now, right? They say UCF paved the way for the Group of 5 schools to possibly make the college football playoff one day. And again, we were talking about how that the Clemson Notre Dame situation could really throw everybody for a loop. And the way I see it now, if the season ended today, folks, we have Clemson 1, Bama 2, Ohio State 3, Notre Dame 4. All right, and Georgia on the outside looking in at number 5. Oklahoma State still undefeated. They're number 6. But Cincinnati is right there, number 7, 4-0. Here's my thing with Cincinnati. And as far as anybody else outside of the Power 5 that's going to get in, BYU is the only other team outside of the Power 5 that could, hypothetically get in. They're number 11. They're 6-0, but they're an independent, and their schedule is, let's just say not that great. They do have... I forget. It's in a couple weeks. They have Boise State. November 6th. So it's not today. It is next week. So there you go. Next week. They're on the road, and they'd be better suited if Boise State is still ranked in the top 25 at that point going on the road. So you get a road-ranked win, possibly. BYU has 4 games left. If they finish 10-0 with that ranked win, that to me is enough to put them in the top 8. Is it going to put them in the Final 4? I highly doubt it. Unless everything else kind of just collapses in front of them, BYU's not making it. Cincinnati, though, for some reason, with less games, I would say probably a slightly better schedule, because they beat up Army 24-10 early in the year when they were ranked, and they dominated SMU last week on the road. That was a statement win for the Cincinnati Bearcats and Luke Fickell. 42-13 last week on the road at number 16 SMU. Now they have Memphis. They're a thorn and everybody's side in the Group of 5. They're a top AAC team, American Athletic Conference, but they're not ranked. They have Houston, ECU, Central Florida. While not ranked, still they're still Central Florida, but they have Temple and Tulsa. So Cincinnati has a better schedule than a team like BYU. Now, the only way for a Group of 5 to make it is to go undefeated and win a conference title. So I can see Cincinnati sitting at 4-0 right now. They have 6 games left. I can see them being 10-0, winning the conference, and being 11-0, and then you have a legit argument. Because we know we're just going to go under the assumption that Clemson will be undefeated, Alabama's going to be undefeated, and Ohio State's going to be undefeated. Now, what do you do with that 4th spot? I think Cincinnati has a legitimate argument. Because if they're a conference champion, I know they're a Group of 5, but if they're a conference champion undefeated, they have the argument over Georgia. And Georgia likely plays Bama in the conference championship game for a rematch. If they lose, 2 losses. if Florida plays them. Florida already has one loss. They'll have to beat Georgia. Big win, right? But they would lose to Alabama, folks. 2 losses. The only caveat to Cincinnati's playoff spot now is Oklahoma State at number 5. Or excuse me, number 6. Oklahoma State is the only team that can prevent, if the top 3 stay the same, Clemson, Alabama, Ohio State. Oklahoma State's the only team that can keep them out. Is Oklahoma State going to keep out Cincinnati? Let's just say Oklahoma State loses 1 game, but they still win the Big 12. Would the committee put Oklahoma State in over Cincinnati? That's the biggest question. Because in our scenario, folks, Clemson at number 1, undefeated, that means they beat Notre Dame at least once. So Notre Dame has 1 loss. And if that 1 loss, obviously depending on tiebreakers and whatnot, if that 1 loss keeps them out of the playoff, or out of the conference championship game, then it's a wash. Notre Dame's done. They're not getting in. They're number 2 in the conference right now. Miami in the ACC at number 12 already has 1 conference loss. Number 15, North Carolina, already has 1 conference loss. Miami does not play Notre Dame. So unless tiebreakers keep them out, Notre Dame, again, we mentioned before, has to split with Clemson and probably beat them in the conference championship game to get in. If they lose to Clemson and they don't get to the championship game, or lose to them twice, they're out. Oklahoma State is the only team that can prevent Cincinnati now from getting to the playoffs. Cincinnati basically controls their own destiny, but that destiny does hinge a tiny bit on Oklahoma State moving forward this season. You want your Group of 5 team in the playoff? Cincinnati is your best bet. They're your best bet. As far as the other games this week, and again, we have to talk Cincinnati. They're a top 10 team. They're legit, and we're going to talk about it more in the pick segment as well. Michigan State. We mentioned this game before as well. Michigan is a 24.5-point favorite at home. New quarterback Joe Milton looks like the real deal. I mean, it was 1 game and they beat up Minnesota on the road, but I'll tell you what, Jim Harbaugh might finally have the quarterback he needed to succeed and maybe catch up to Ohio State. It appears Penn State might not be as good as we thought. So if Michigan can get by Penn State and they beat Ohio State at the end of the year, I'll tell you, Michigan's that team. This seems to be the year where if everything does break right, then everything is going to break right. And I know it's weird. I know it's weird for me just to say that out loud, but Michigan does need its breaks. To get to the playoff, you need some breaks. Going undefeated, you need some breaks. If this is the year everything breaks right for Michigan, this is a team that could run its way to the college football playoff for the first time and win a Big Ten title, obviously. Michigan State's a dumpster fire right now. I mean, again, hey guys, they lost to my school, Rutgers. And they lost to Rutgers last week. I mean, come on, man. Michigan State is, they have to get their own foot out of their butt. So I don't think they're going to keep this close at all. How about this, though? Kansas State, by the way. This is a noon kickoff. They are a 4-point dog now against West Virginia. This moved from 3.5. So more people are taking West Virginia. Now, Kansas State, they don't have their top quarterback right now. They still have a solid offense, but they have that loss to Arkansas State. So, what is Kansas? But they've won 4 in a row since then. They're number 16 in the country. And, outside of Oklahoma State, they're the best team in the Big 12 right now, which is hard to believe. They don't have Skylar Thompson. Deuce Vaughn's their solid running back. But they are underdogs against West Virginia. So Vegas might know something that I don't, but I'm still very shocked at that line. The fact that Kansas State's not a road favorite against West Virginia, even by a point, let's just say. Right now they are 4-point dogs. People are hopping on the West Virginia train here today at noon. Coastal Carolina, how about them? 5-0. Number 20 in the country. They're at Georgia State today, and they're a 2.5-point favorite on the road. That's an intriguing game. Sun Belt, baby. But Coastal Carolina, hey, they're for real. They're for real, at least for who they play. Now, I'm not saying you can put Coastal Carolina against a team like Cincinnati and have Coastal Carolina beat Cincinnati, or put Coastal Carolina in the college football playoff. But Coastal Carolina, they got a little something going. 5-0, 2.5-point favorite on the road, ranked 28th in the country. I like that. I might take a little sleeper bet on that one. The fact that they're less than a field goal favorite on the road against Georgia State, that's enticing. Iowa State, number 23. They have 2 losses. They're still in the top 25. But how about this, folks? They are a 28.5-point favorite against Kansas. Kansas, I don't know what's going on. You would think Les Miles could finally inject some life into that program. They're 0-5. Kansas is god-awful. Kansas is back to the basement end of the worst Power 5 football program. That's no longer a tie between Kansas and Rutgers. Kansas is awful this year. Let me give you a rundown of their scores this year. Kansas lost to Coastal Carolina 38-23. People thought that was a horrible loss at first, but now Coastal Carolina is a legitimate football team. 5-0, they're top 20. 47-14 to Baylor, 47-7 Oklahoma State, 38-17 to West Virginia, and 55-14 to Kansas State. They scored their most points against Coastal Carolina. In conference play, they can't score more than 17 points. And that's embarrassing. It really is. Notre Dame, 3:30. They are a 20-point favorite on the road against Georgia Tech. Oklahoma State, number 6 in the country. They're hosting Texas. Texas looking for a bounce-back game. Oklahoma State's only 3.5-point favorites at home. Only 3.5. Surprised that's not bigger. Boise State, we talked about them a little bit before because BYU has them on their schedule. They've only played 1 game this year, but they are 14-point favorites on the road against Air Force. That's later tonight at 6. Alabama, oh my goodness, 30.5-point favorites against Mississippi State. My goodness, that's huge. Mississippi State, since beating LSU to start the year, they have been absolutely short of. They've been nothing short of awful on offense. It's unbelievable. You figure Mike Leach's offense, you're gonna have your ups and downs. If you're relying 75% on the pass with your air raid offense, you can look great, as they did against LSU. But then since then, folks, 14 points, 2 points, and don't forget, 2 points is safety, so that came from the defense. They had no offensive points, and they scored 14 last week. They scored 14 against Texas A&M. Where did Mike Leach go? What happened to Mike Leach? Is Mike Leach going to be one and done in Mississippi State? I don't think so, but you never know. It's 2020. Crazy things have happened. They scored 44 points, Mississippi State. Week 1 against LSU, right? 10-point victory. Since then, they have scored a combined 30 points in 3 games. 30 points in 3 games. They averaged 10 points a game since putting up 44 against LSU. On the road. What in the world happened to Mississippi State? I fully expect Mac Jones to throw 4 touchdown passes in the first half and sit out the second half. And this is without Jalen Waddle, by the way, for Alabama. What a shame they lost him for the season. Broken foot, broken ankle. What a darn shame. Waddle had 25 catches for 557 yards and 4 touchdowns this year. He's been a monster, and Alabama won't have him the rest of the year. That's not going to affect them against Mississippi State today, but in the long run, it could affect Alabama's chances to win a title. But don't forget, they still have Devontae Smith, and they have this guy named John Mechie. You still have NFL caliber receivers on that offense, and you still have you have Najee Harris in the backfield. 595 yards this year, only 103 carries. This dude is averaging almost 6 yards a carry, and he's got 14 touchdowns on the ground. Alabama will be fine, at least tonight. I'll worry about them when they get to the SEC championship game and play a rematch against Georgia or play a team like Florida. That's it though, and then the college football playoff. Later tonight in the Big Ten, Ohio State, Penn State. Ohio State's a 12.5-point favorite on the road, and I'm not shocked based on the upset loss for Penn State last week. I'm really not. And then the fact that Justin Fields is phenomenal. You want to talk about Trevor Lawrence all day, and he's the number 1 quarterback. Justin Fields is damn good. Oh my God, Justin Fields is so good. He only had 1 incompletion, and then his performance was a little overshadowed by Graham Mertz of Wisconsin last week, because Graham Mertz threw 5 touchdowns, and nobody expected that. But Fields threw 1 incompletion, and his one incompletion was dropped. All right, let's be real here. His incompletion was dropped by his receiver, Christopher Olave. He had 2 touchdowns, had almost 60 yards rushing on the ground, had another rushing touchdown. I mean, Fields is going to have a Heisman-worthy campaign in just 8 games, as long as Ohio State plays 8 games, of course. It's on the road. Usually this is Penn State's whiteout game against Ohio State. It's not happening. There's no fans, so the lack of a crowd, I think, in this instance will affect Penn State because Penn State's whiteout when they play Ohio, especially when they play Ohio State. That's one of the best home field advantages in college football, but I think Ohio State's going to roll over them today. Texas A&M, 12-point favorites at home against Arkansas. Florida, welcome back Florida, 12.5-point favorites against Missouri at home. SMU, tough loss last week to Cincinnati. They are 13-point favorites at home against Navy. Just going down the list, North Carolina, 7-point favorites at home on the road, against Virginia. Surprised that's not bigger. Oklahoma, how about this? They're 14.5-point favorites on the road against Texas Tech. Oklahoma, 3-2 this year. I mean, they've struggled a bit. They have struggled a bit. They're not the same Oklahoma. They're still a 2-touchdown favorite on the road. BYU, we talked about them before, 29-point favorite at home against Western Kentucky, and I wouldn't be shocked. I wouldn't be shocked if they covered because BYU soft schedule. All right, so that's your rundown of the top 25 in college football here today. We're going to step aside and take one last break. On the other side, 5 picks coming up. Don't go away. It's College Football Pick'em right here on AM 1490 Sports Betting Radio.
Now back to College Football Pick'em with Nick Kosko, presented by Harbor Jiu Jitsu on AM 1490 Sports Betting Radio.
Welcome back to College Football Pick'em right here on AM 1490 Sports Betting Radio, presented by Harbor Jiu Jitsu. I'm your host, Nick Kosko. Don't forget to give me a follow on Twitter at Nick Kosko59. Be sure to follow our station as well at 1490 Sports Bet. And, of course, follow Harbor Jiu Jitsu, JIUJITSU. Follow Harbor Jiu Jitsu on Facebook and Instagram as well. Get the updates on the school, see what we're putting out. It's some great content put up, and get in there for a great workout. Even if you never rolled before, I mean, I highly recommend it. I'm wearing the hoodie right now, folks. I mean, I love representing the school. It's a great time, great workout, and especially if you're into stuff like MMA. We have MMA striking as well. If you've wrestled before, we highly recommend that you come in for a workout, a good sesh, learn a new martial art. It's just so great. All right, let's dive into our pick segment now. 12, 16, and 2 on the year. We're coming back, folks. Coming back. We were 2-3 last week. It's okay. I mean, but the games we lost early on. We had Ole Miss plus 3.5, loser. Oklahoma State minus 3.5 against Iowa State. Backdoor cover. Iowa State was trailing by 10 with less than 2 minutes left, and of course they scored. Penn State. Oh, here we go. Yeah, hatred for Penn State comes out today. Penn State minus 6 at Indiana last week, folks. Up 7 in overtime, and guess what? Give up a touchdown. All right, we'll go to the next overtime period. Nope. Indiana goes for 2. You're screwed either way. There's your loser. But we had Cincinnati plus 2.5 against SMU on the road, and Michigan minus 3 at Minnesota. Both teams won in dominating fashion. So those are our 2 wins from last week. So now we'll dive into this week's games, and we're going to start out with the aforementioned Memphis and Cincinnati game. And we were talking about Cincinnati in the last segment and their playoff hopes. They're touchdown favorites on the road at home, and that line has actually moved 6.5, folks. So big news there. That's a huge half a point. We know we monitor. I give these picks to Rich earlier in the week. The fact that line moved to 6.5 tells me something. People like Memphis, but guess what? I still like Cincinnati. It's just under a touchdown. Now, sans a missed extra point, of course, but that's huge. That is huge, and I believe Cincinnati is good enough to do that, win by at least a touchdown, if not more. So we're going to roll with Cincinnati. The Luke Fickell hype train is leaving the station, and I hope you guys are hopping on board with me. I like Cincinnati minus 6.5 today against Memphis at home. Next game, we have Kansas State at West Virginia, the surprise game. Now, that game is now at plus 4 for Kansas State. And I mentioned before that Kansas State is probably the other best team in the Big 12 at this current juncture, aside from Oklahoma State, just because they've won 4 the top-ranked team, and they're on Oklahoma State's heels. Kansas State has an interesting schedule coming up after this game, because they have Oklahoma State next week at home, and then they're at Iowa State, they're at Baylor, and they host Texas. So the gauntlet is coming up for Kansas State to see if they are actually going to be a legit Big 12 contender, if not one of the representatives in the Big 12 Conference Championship game. Now, tough game today at West Virginia. West Virginia cannot be trifled with. It's a noon game coming up later. You look at the ESPN FBI, the matchup predictor. It's favoring Kansas State at 52%, but West Virginia kept it close with Oklahoma State. They lost a tough one at Texas Tech last week, but they dominated Kansas. They edged out Baylor. And they beat Eastern Kentucky earlier this year. So, I mean, no really big win for West Virginia, but, I mean, they're a pain. They can really be a pain, but, you know, the fact that Kansas State is a 4-point dog now on the road, I really think they're a better team. Again, even without Skylar Thompson at quarterback, I trust Kansas State right now, and that might be putting a little too much faith in them, but I got to roll with them in that offense. Plus, we'll take Kansas State +4 on the road against West Virginia. You know, I mentioned my school, Rutgers, earlier in the show as well. We had it at 10.5 before. They were +10.5 at home, and I'm surprised there wasn't more. That line is, you know, it's right there. It's 10.5. That's pretty much where it really not much movement in that one this week. It opened at 12. Indiana was -12 to open up. Now it moved to 10.5 earlier in the week. Some books have it at 10 now. But, you know, got to roll with Indiana here. Unfortunately, you know, I mean, as a fan and alum, I would love to see Rutgers cover this game, if not win it outright. Obviously, win it outright, of course. But, you know, you look at Indiana, I think they're legit. I think Rutgers might have a tough time stopping Michael Penix Jr. He's gonna run wild, and until I see Rutgers play a more legitimate Big Ten team, I cannot believe I'm saying that. After beating Michigan State last week, you know, I mean, I could see Rutgers covering this game but not winning. But in the end, I think they're gonna come down to earth just a little bit here today. You know, they're in the spotlight now. It's still a young team. It's still a new team. And again, I know everybody was under the same restrictions where they couldn't practice as much, but, you know, Greg Schiano is still going to have some work to do. The flaws weren't exactly exposed last week because Michigan State played so poorly and Rutgers defense played their lights out, you know, forcing 7 turnovers. That's not going to happen again. I believe they're going to come down to earth just a little bit, and I think this game could be competitive for a while, and then Indiana might end up winning by 14 at some point at the end of the day. You know, maybe like a 28-14 score, like, you know, 35-21, something like that. So for now, going to roll with Indiana -10.5 against my school, Rutgers, on the road. We'll move down to LSU and Auburn. That game opened up at 2.5 for us on the road. LSU a 2.5-point favorite against Auburn, and I'm really surprised it's not more because Auburn has been kind of all over the place. That offense is struggling mightily up and down, left and right. That line's moved to 3. We have to acknowledge it. I'm still going to take LSU. It's only a field goal game. You know, they don't have Miles Brennan here today. Once again, TJ Finley, the true freshman quarterback, is going to start. But I still like LSU because the offense didn't really look any different without Miles Brennan. Still looks solid, and LSU rolled to a victory over South Carolina. The defense looked better, and if that defense can play, you know, pretty much that well against Auburn, I think LSU is going to have an easy time covering this football game. So they kind of put it all together last week despite not having their starter. But again, I like LSU here, -3 on the road against Auburn. Then our final game, Texas at Oklahoma State. Oklahoma State, I mentioned before, you know, in the relation to the college football playoff, Oklahoma State is the biggest threat to Cincinnati not making the college football playoff and being that first group of 5 team to make the Final Four. And I think Texas, folks, is due for a bounce-back week. They were 3.5-point dogs on the road when it opened up. And I believe it is still there, just barring on any late movement. But again, Texas, they have Sam Ehlinger. Yes, and it's still a 3.5, by the way. They have Sam Ehlinger. He's a gamer. They can put, again, Texas, they're going to put up points. It's a matter of Oklahoma State keeping up. Because even the 2 games Texas lost, they put up 31 and they put up 45. Those are the 2 games they lost. Other games they won, 59, 63, and 27. A down performance against Baylor, but they got the win. Oklahoma State, it's tough to trust the offense. They're a good football team, but the problem is Spencer Sanders just came back. Doesn't look like himself. Chuba Hubbard in the backfield, great running back. And there's Tylan Wallace catching the football at wide receiver. Those are your big 3. But we have not seen Oklahoma State put together a full contest with those 3 absolutely taking over a football game. And until I see it, I can't take them. So I will go with Texas on the road, +3.5. I believe they can actually win this game outright and really throw the Big Ten for a loop. Again, it's 3.5, so if they lose by a field goal, we win, folks. All right, so just a quick recap right here for our picks this week. We have Cincinnati -6.5, Kansas State +4, Indiana minus 10.5, LSU minus 3, and Texas plus 3.5. Those are my 5 picks this week. Let's hope we go 5-0 for the first time this week, or for this year. And if we're 5-0, folks, we're above 500 going into next week. I'll tell you what, that would be tremendous, and you can come back and thank me later, or you can come back and yell at me next week as well. All right, that's going to do it for me. This has been College Football Pick'em right here on AM 1490 Sports Betting Radio. I am Nick Kosko saying so long. Enjoy the football games today, folks. Let's have a great day of college football. Go out and win some money. Follow those trends. Do some live betting. And take my advice. Get these. Make sure you're monitoring everything all today. All right, don't let anything slip by you. All right, it's College Football Pick'em right here on AM 1490 Sports Betting Radio.